A plate left unwashed. A window carelessly left open. 2 weeks of vacation that would alter the course of human history. September 1928, and in a cramped London laboratory, something extraordinary was quietly unfolding in the shadows of neglect. When Dr. Alexander Fleming returned to his workspace at St. Mary's Hospital after his Scottish holiday, he expected chaos. The bacteriologist was notorious among his colleagues for maintaining what one might politely call a disorganized laboratory. Petri dishes stacked haphazardly, cultures left out, the kind of sloppiness that would make any meticulous scientist wince. But that morning, as Fleming prepared to discard his contaminated bacterial plates, his trained eye caught something impossible. On one dish, growing in a halo of crystal-clear destruction, was a peculiar blue-green mold. Around it, the deadly Staphylococcus aureus bacteria he'd been culturing had simply dissolved, vanished, as though something invisible had reached across the agar and erased them from existence. This was the beautiful mistake, the accidental discovery of penicillin. The mold itself belonged to an ancient lineage, one that predates humanity by hundreds of millions of years. Penicillium, derived from the Latin word for painter's brush due to its distinctive branching structure, had been waging chemical warfare against bacteria since long before the first human drew breath. Scientists now believe this evolutionary arms race began in prehistoric times, when fungi and bacteria competed viciously for limited nutrients in primordial soils and decaying matter. The ability to produce penicillin wasn't just random chance, it was survival, a fungal defense mechanism woven across epochs, weaponized through millions of years of natural selection. The Penicillium species produces penicillin as a biochemical sword, slashing through bacterial cell walls, preventing them from dividing and multiplying. To a bacterium, encountering penicillin is like attempting to build a house while someone systematically destroys the walls faster than you can construct them. Fleming's contaminated dish likely received its unwanted visitor from the laboratory one floor below, where a mycologist named C.J. Latouche cultivated various mold species. A single microscopic spore floating up through a stairwell, drifting through an open window or gap in the door, landing precisely where it needed to land. If Fleming had been more careful, he'd cleaned that plate immediately. If he'd incubated it as intended, instead of leaving it on a bench during his vacation, that spore would have died. The temperature conditions that prevailed during his absence were unusually perfect, a meteorological fluke that allowed both the bacteria and the mold to flourish simultaneously. Had London been warmer or colder by just a few degrees, the mold would have died, or the bacteria would have overgrown it. Millions of variables had to align, and they did. Fleming named the mysterious substance secreted by the mold penicillin, and published his findings in 1929. Then, remarkably, he stopped. The challenge of extracting and purifying penicillin proved overwhelming. Despite recruiting renowned chemists, Fleming abandoned the project after several frustrating years. For nearly a decade, penicillin languished in obscurity, a footnote in a minor medical journal that no one seemed to read or care about. The beautiful mistake was forgotten. Until 1938, when an Oxford pathologist named Howard Florey stumbled across Fleming's dusty paper while leafing through old journals. Florey assembled a team that included biochemist Ernst Chain, the often forgotten Norman Heatley, and several others who would transform Fleming's laboratory curiosity into humanity's most powerful weapon against infection. They worked with desperate intensity. By 1940, they'd proven penicillin could save mice infected with deadly streptococcus. 8 mice were injected with lethal bacteria. 4 received penicillin. By morning, the 4 treated mice scampered around their cages, alive and healthy. The other 4 dead. But
producing penicillin in quantities sufficient for human treatment bordered on impossible. To treat their first patient, a policeman named Albert Alexander, suffering from a catastrophic infection after scorching his face on a rose thorn, they needed roughly 2,000 liters of mold culture fluid to extract a few grams of pure penicillin. For 5 days, Alexander improved dramatically, his fever dropping, his wounds beginning to heal. Then the penicillin ran out. They'd given him every molecule they'd managed to produce, even filtering and re-extracting it from his urine. It wasn't enough. Alexander died, and with him died the hope that this miracle substance could ever be mass-produced. The solution came from the most unexpected source, a rotting cantaloupe purchased at a Peoria, Illinois market in 1943. A laboratory assistant named Mary Hunt brought in the moldy melon, its golden fuzzy coating catching her eye. Testing revealed it was Penicillium chrysogenum, a different species entirely. This strain produced 200 times more penicillin than Fleming's original Penicillium notatum. Scientists would later discover that a single mutation, one base pair in a gene called PAH, made all the difference. Fleming's mold wasted precious resources, converting phenylacetic acid into an unwanted compound. The cantaloupe mold, through blind evolutionary luck, had a defective version of the same enzyme. It redirected nearly all available resources into penicillin production instead. Further enhancement through X-ray mutation and selected breeding pushed production 1,000 times higher. By the time Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, they carried penicillin in their medical kits. In World War I, 18% of soldiers died from bacterial pneumonia. In World War II, with penicillin, that death rate plummeted below 1%. Infected wounds that would have meant amputation or death now healed. Bacterial endocarditis, bacterial meningitis, pneumonia, sepsis, all the ancient killers that had stalked humanity for millennia suddenly became treatable, survivable. Penicillin has since saved over 500 million lives. It stands as perhaps the single most successful medical intervention in human history. A beautiful mistake that became a blockbuster precisely because of all the accidents and oversights and coincidences that brought it into existence. But every miracle carries shadows. For a small percentage of people, penicillin isn't salvation, it's a trigger. Approximately 10% of Americans report penicillin allergies, though remarkably, less than 1% actually have true immunological hypersensitivity. For those who do, the immune system catastrophically misidentifies penicillin as an invading threat. The reaction begins within minutes. Hives erupt across the skin like wildfire spreading across dry grass. Swelling distorts the face, hands, feet. The throat begins to close, blood pressure crashes, the heart races, stumbles, loses rhythm. In the most severe cases, anaphylaxis transforms the body into a battlefield where your own defenses have turned traitor. Without immediate epinephrine, without emergency intervention, death can arrive in minutes. Even non-allergic reactions carry risks: diarrhea, nausea, headaches, fungal superinfections as beneficial bacteria are indiscriminately slaughtered alongside pathogens. Rare but devastating complications include Stevens-Johnson syndrome, where the skin blisters and peels away in sheets, or drug-induced nephritis, where the kidneys become inflamed and begin to fail. High doses can trigger seizures, electrolyte imbalances, metabolic chaos. The body, overwhelmed by the substance meant to save it, begins to unravel. And then there's the greatest threat of all: resistance. Fleming himself warned of it in his 1945 Nobel Prize acceptance speech. Just 4 years after mass production began, bacteria were already adapting, evolving, learning to survive. Today, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, Methla, stalks hospital corridors like a ghost from medicine's pre-antibiotic past. Bacteria produce penicillinases, enzymes specifically evolved to degrade penicillin before it can kill them. A beautiful mistake that spawned its own evolutionary counter-revolution. The mold continues its ancient work, still growing in damp places, on forgotten food, in water-damaged buildings. It hasn't changed. We're the ones who've changed. Who've harnessed its chemical warfare for our own purposes. Who've industrialized a process that evolved over hundreds of millions of years in soil decay. Scientists still search for new antibiotics, new weapons in humanity's endless war against microscopic enemies, but none have matched penicillin's impact. None have saved so many with so little. A contaminated plate, a careless researcher, a vacation at precisely the wrong time, or perhaps precisely the right one. Remove any single element from that
A September morning in 1928, and the modern world becomes unrecognizable. Millions who lived would have died. Medical procedures we take for granted would remain impossibly dangerous. The course of wars, the trajectory of civilization itself, all altered by one beautiful, accidental, catastrophically important mistake. Fleming's original moldy plate was eventually lost, but descendants of that first Penicillium strain still exist, carefully preserved in laboratories, a living link to the moment everything changed. The mold doesn't know what it's done. It can't comprehend the millions of lives it saved, the suffering it's prevented, the parents who got to watch their children grow because a spore happened to land exactly where it needed to land. It just grows, producing its chemical weapon as it always has, as it always will, locked in an evolutionary dance with bacteria that neither knows nor cares about human gratitude. Beautiful mistakes rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, unnoticed, mistaken for failures, until someone looks closer and sees the impossible made real. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, those mistakes save the world.